This is a presentation of Holy Faith Media. Visit us at holyfaithmedia.com.
In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. Amen. Brethren in Christ, Laudate Jesus Christus.
In secula. Yes.
This is Timothy Flanders with the Meaning of Catholic. I'm joined today by co-host Jeremiah Bannister, the Paleocrat. How you doing, Jeremiah?
I'm doing good, man. I've missed you, buddy. I've missed you.
Yeah. Once again, we joined by our resident Politico for an analysis of the complex chaos that is circling us in the United States of America, with consequences reverberating across the globe. So we're going to start off today's show with a quick recap of all the failed attempts to unseat Trump. There's been a number of different attempts to unseat
There's been a bunch of
Trump. Yeah. Let's see. I mean, it's been basically 4 years of a worldwide protest to unseat him. Did it start with Russiagate? Is that where it started? I know the impeachment came later.
It started with just the advent of referring to him as a Nazi. And that was the escalator, dude. It was the Mexican rapists, right? It was they're sending the Mexicans over, right? So from the very beginning, it was that. You had the ladies, remember? There were all the ladies that came out saying that he did naughty things. And so you had that. And then, of course, Russia. That was real quick. In fact, that was a plan that we now know was hatched by Hillary Clinton, kind of like the plan to even boost Trump, right? It was the Pied Piper memo from WikiLeaks that we know for a fact. It's not even debatable anymore. But yeah, they've been on the Russiagate thing. You can start the proximate starting point of a political operation would be Russiagate.
So what exactly was the content of the email? So they've got
for the people that want to know. The Pied Piper, strategy is what it was, and it was. I believe the guy's name's Doug Band. It's been a while, right? It's been a while since I've thought about Doug Band. But what it was an idea that they said, okay, let's think of who would be the easiest people to run against. Because to Hillary, she had to do that. Everybody wants to be able to say that they can go against the easiest person, but when you're like the most hated woman in the world, you really need to do that. And so she commissioned her goons, and they put together this thing called the Pied Piper strategy, and it was to boost certain candidates at the time. Ben Carson was one of them. I believe that Ted Cruz was the other one. There's three of them, but Donald Trump was the one. And they said that Donald Trump, not only could you, if you focused, right, laser focused on Donald Trump and treated him as if he was just the foregone conclusion, right? That, yeah, there's a primary ahead, but this is the one that if you play into that and you boost that and help to promote that idea, then he would not only win, you would help him to win, but he would ultimately be an easy person to beat. And so that was the idea. It didn't turn out like she planned, for a lot of different factors, but that was the memo. And it's all laid out. It's got all of the rationale behind it and how they would do it. And that was part of the WikiLeaks. And so when people were saying, don't look at that, that's one of the things they didn't want you to look at.
Okay, so we got way back in the election in 2016, the Russia conspiracy theory, it goes on for a number of years. I don't know when that even starts to die down. And then there's also the impeachment that was just last year, if if I recall. Am I missing anything?
I mean,
before we even get to 2020.
I mean, you could, if you wanted to put together a list of the things that were involved, right? Each scandal, because Russiagate, when you say Russiagate, it's actually this, terrible witch's brew of, salacious rumors and ridiculous claims, right? And things that are just outright falsehoods, disinformation, things like that. Things with the Steele dossier, like the PP Gate stuff and all of that. That, with Russiagate, it not only was that kind of the advent, and I would also add, just to remind people, seeing that we're in Grand Rapids, that part of Russiagate was that Trump had this kind of secret channel at Spectrum Health, a local health organization here in town, by the way, that was getting signals from Russia. And that was one of the reasons why he was finding himself here. And he found himself here again on the eve of the election. He found himself here in Grand Rapids again. So he likes Grand Rapids. And the conspiracy was that, well, it's because maybe he's getting the signals from Russia through a hospital, And so there was a lot of ridiculousness that went on with that. But it was easy to just lump all of those claims into Russiagate. And it really was Mueller, his testimony, that was so ridiculous. I mean, it was one of the dumbest spectacles that we've seen. You get this guy up there. He obviously has no clue what he's talking about. He's struggling to put together sentences. He doesn't know where things are inside of the report that they put together. And he's constantly having, what page is that again? And doing that kind of number, delaying all the time, driving everybody nuts. And you feel a little bit badly for him almost because, he's a deep state stooge, but he's also an old man. It's kind of like Joe Biden, you feel really badly for what he's going through. And so, but it was really when that happened, when that took place, because everybody's putting their money on it. Right? There's a lot of bets on that, and it was going to take him down finally after all this time and all this money. And it was a big fat, it did not work. And so that would be the end of that. But I think that it's easy to sum it up with Russia. And then the kind of analogy with that with Ukraine and the entire impeachment, I think that sums up the two primary mechanisms that they've used to some degree of success, dragging it on and everything else and dragging them through it since 2016.
So do you think there has been a vast conspiracy of elites and their Chinese money trying to take Trump down from day one?
Yes. Yes. We don't even need to add China into it. I mean, we can, but it's not necessary. We have people didn't like the term deep state, right? There's a lot of individuals that go, oh, there's no such thing as the deep state, but yet they really, really appreciate the managerial bureaucratic class that can slow stuff down, like the resistance people that are like, well, I'm just a cog in the wheel, but I can really grind it to a halt. Or, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't do that. Oh, I was supposed to. I'll get right on it. Wink, wink, and not do that. And that these people remain, and it's actually hard to get rid of them. Trump has recently signed something that would make it a lot easier to kick those guys to the curb.
And can you just especially for non-Americans listening to things like deep state, can you explain what you mean by that in terms of bureaucracy? Yeah. What is the problem there?
Well, it's a pro and a con, and it might surprise some people to hear me say that, but there is a pro and a con to that. On the one hand, a deep state is simply an unelected a class of governmental workers. And so there are people who career people, right? And you heard this a lot during the impeachment. You heard this a lot during Russiagate. These are career individuals at the DOJ or career individuals, FBI and CIA or whatever, any group at all. I mean, it didn't matter. They were career, meaning that they dedicated their lives and they've been there for a very long time and they're not elected. So they kind of stick around through multiple administrations. Okay. So you may have gone through and been part of the state. You may have been part of the machine for years and years of your life. That does bring some degree of continuity and stability to a government. Imagine the alternative to that in a way. If you just said, well, you've been working for us and you're term limited out, or you have to hire every person in this Leviathan, right? You have to rehire every single time you get a new person and stuff. That'd be really difficult. On the other hand, what it does, there's a negative side to this, and that is that it's easy, especially when you get to a very large state. It gets really easy for them to feel as if they are laws unto themselves, and that if they don't like who was elected by the people, then they can work to sabotage that. And we know that had actually been going on. There's even more recent reveals with the leaks that were going on with Millie Weaver. She used to be with InfoWars. She did a documentary called Shadowgate. She recently, there's a bunch of leaked Zoom calls with people who are coordinating the protests, if you want to call them that, the insurrections that are going on and that will go on over the next however long now that there's going to be contested stuff, it's just going to fuel it more. But a lot of the people who are part of the Zoom calls, they weren't just community organizers. These are people who were involved with DHS. These are people who are involved in various elements of the IRS and different things that were able to leak things to the press. And they even boast of that they leaked to the press, and that the press had respected their privacy and kept them private, and they built a good rapport with them. And so the idea is, if you're not going to get fired, if it's really hard to get you out of there, and it's really hard. So if it's hard to get you out, and if you're not elected in, and you don't like the person running, or you don't like the person who won, then there is it's almost like the ring, right? What's the name of that ring? The invisibility, that you have a degree of invisibility, because who knows who you are? You're a nobody in the grand scheme. You're not in the papers or anything else. And so because you have that invisibility, that cloak of secrecy, you're able to do things that are extraordinarily malicious. And over the last 4 years, we've even seen them coordinate inside of coffee shops and other places. This has done investigations by the government on the government, saying that people at all levels were coordinating with the resistance. In fact, the last thing I'll say is the resistance, the anonymous person, supposedly high-ranking person that wrote the resistance, this kind of manifesto that got everybody really excited. He was one of these deep staters. He's just a guy in the state apparatus, and not a high profiler, admittedly. He's no Comey, he's no Clapper, he's none of that stuff. But he was one of the icons, in fact, in this. And everybody who was at the impeachment, almost all of them were people who'd been in government for a very long time.
Right. So Trump has declared war on the deep state from before he was elected. Drain the swamp was one of his slogans.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense that this whole huge bureaucracy has been against him for 4 years. So, Jeremiah, do you think last year, the impeachment and then the beginning of COVID-19, do you think that the deep state, the globalist elites were using COVID-19 and or lockdowns to bring about what we're seeing now?
I believe it played a role. I think what we're seeing now is extraordinarily complex, and it's by design, right? It's kind of like the insurance policy that was going on with Strzok and company during during Russiagate and stuff like that. And I think that even if I don't want to, I don't want to say I take a position that knows with any degree of certainty that says, yes, it was used for this plot, right? At the same time, it's more than believable, and we can see it based on decisions that have been made by those in power, specifically those aligned with the establishment, the uniparty system, the neocons and the Dems, that they don't let a good crisis go to waste. And so they're recognizing this and saying, look, they've got a guy in Biden that's just garbage. Their entire gaggle of weirdos that were running were garbage. And the fact that he even won is stunning, if you think about it, not just because he's, probably got Parkinson's and stuff, but because he's, he lost so many of he had no momentum in the beginning. There was no, which ordinarily, in fact, historically, people who, candidates who do really well in the primaries, there's a model that's predicted 25 of the 27 past elections, and they base it almost exclusively off of the energy and the enthusiasm for that candidate during the primary, and specifically in the states that kind of front load that, right? So Iowa, New Hampshire, and he waited till what, man? Super Tuesday? Like it was, so nobody was even excited about that. So you have this, and I think that it was fertile ground, right? It was easy to manipulate, right? It was something that it's a fear that you can't see. It's a monster that you can't see or taste or touch and stuff. And you may have it already. You just don't know. Don't go outside. And it's easy. So if you have a plan that is malicious, this is a perfect ingredient for it. And so many things can be a consequence of that. And we've seen that with Detroit leaks and the stuff going on in Detroit right now, with making sure that watchers were not able to get very close. In fact, they had to go to court to even be allowed to see, because some of the people who were training individuals working at the polls in these precincts were training people on how to make it so that poll watchers couldn't get near them, so that they
just so viewers know, the concept of the poll watcher is that people are counting votes and there are two different parties represented, basically. So there's watchers on both sides who are basically making everything objective as possible. So that's what Jeremiah is referring to here. So one side was basically cut out in certain areas of watching the polls.
Mm-hmm. Because of social distancing. And the idea was that, I mean, and for people who think that that's outlandish, what I just said, you can listen to the audios yourself, right? I'm going to say a lot of things on here, and I encourage everybody, please verify this. Go and look it up. Detroit Leaks was put out by bigleaguepolitics.com, and there was a whole bunch of these audios, these recordings that were done, kind of like the Zoom. I mentioned Millie Weaver and the Zoom meetings that were going on with the protesters. But Detroit Leaks, what that was, it was a hashtag, kind of like WikiLeaks, but Detroit. And what that was a whole bunch of these trainers, people training, and you can hear the audience. There's a lot of people that they're training on this, and they're teaching them ways essentially to commit fraud. Like, there's no other way to put this. Ways to make it so that it's easy to do this, including even things most people wouldn't think about, like a lot of the individuals who may be working toward the end of, if you had like an assembly line, right? And each person fulfills a certain role. The person next to the books, a lot of those were going to be young kids, but they had to leave at some point, and eventually they wouldn't even be there as to monitor what's going on. So that was another level, another layer of possible accountability that was gone. And they talk about, and they're laughing. And so, but it was COVID. It was COVID that was at the core of so many of the protocols and regulations put in place that restricted people who were able to be there for the sole purpose of verifying the authenticity and validity of ballots.
So there's a lot of different factors involved, and I want to ask you about the evidence of actual fraud in just a minute. But any other factors before we even get to November 3rd? I read an article in the American Mind about how the military has been making signs that they will side against Trump. There's obviously big tech has been in the news. They've been censoring a ton of things. They censored Hunter Biden's scandalous, the New York Post scandal with Hunter Biden after I believe millions of mail-in votes had already been cast at that point. And there's also just the mail-in ballots themselves, the lockdown. Yeah. Any other factors you want to touch on before we even kind of give a blow-by-blow of what happened since the beginning of Tuesday?
Yeah, well, and I want to make this very clear. Right up front, I believe that the United States is undergoing a color revolution against its own people. I know that is a color revolution. Let me be really specific about this. A color revolution is this idea that let's say that we have opposed various regimes across the world. Imagine that we meddle in other nations and their elections. We do a lot.
America never meddles with
Yeah,
other elections.
we've
We only
never
promote
meddled.
democracy. What are you talking about?
Yeah, that's well, and this goes under the banner of that, because what it is I'll just take a definition right here from online. Participants in color revolutions have mostly used nonviolent resistance, also called civil resistance. Such methods as demonstrations, strikes, and interventions have aimed at protest against governments seen as corrupt and or authoritarian, and to advocate democracy, and they've built up strong pressure for change. Generally, these are associated with a specific color or flower as their, and it is particularly when dealing in other countries, a lot of NGOs, my contention would be that the color revolution we're experiencing now is wrapped up with the color black. And you see that not only with Black Lives Matter, but you see that with Antifa, and both of them have one actually has a flower that is their symbol, and another one would have a fist that is it's similar, but I don't want to push that symbol too far. I think that just the color black is all that's essential. But that it's primarily with these movements to topple these regimes, right? Which we have done, by the way. And you can go online, you can look up just entire lists of different nations that we've done this to and that have had these revolutions. But it's particularly student activists in organizing and creating nonviolent resistance. The problem is that the people who put this together, like there's a great article over by Nota Bene on Medium, and he says that the term might have his origins in the works of Gene Sharp, and he wrote guidebooks on how to do this, popular revolts and stuff like that. But he was using Madison Avenue style marketing techniques. Okay, so he's using propaganda. He's using essentially PR, right? He's saying, how do we do this? How do we work this in such a way that we can get people to change their minds and connect with those cultures and connect with those people that really do make it feel to them as if it really is them, and that it's what they believe, that they identified entirely for themselves. And he says that it was something that you needed to buddy up with pop culture. You needed to use catchy, content-free slogans, logos, and team colors. And you could go on. I mean, there's other things. There's seven pillars of this. And in fact, Glenn Beck did an excellent, it's only like 9 minutes. He actually just boom, 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 boom. And he went through the 7 pillars of this, and those were put together. Let me get the guy's name so that way people can know for sure. Michael McFaul. Okay. And he's a former ambassador to Russia under the Obama administration. And he came up with the 7 pillars of color revolution. And those 7 pillars, if people look at what we've been enduring, in fact, for a while, but especially during the time of the primaries leading up to this election in the general, you can look at those 7 steps in that, and you can see not only how they're playing out in the United States, but you can see the parallels, like, NGOs or American corporations, and look at the amount of money that's being given, because that's one thing they admit, is that it takes a huge sum of money. And these protest movements have definitely gotten that, and they get free publicity anyway. So you don't even have to try to get people in there, like you would in a foreign country. But that essentially is what I mean by a color revolution. And I believe that we're experiencing that right now.
Okay. Can you touch on a little bit more on those 7 pillars? Because it's one thing to have George Soros fund Black Lives Matter and have BLM and Antifa go about causing seditions and burning police cars. How do you translate that into voter fraud?
Well, it's one dynamic of it. And it's not even necessarily voter fraud. It's the idea that the conditions are set in such a way that there's doubt regarding the validity of the election. That's all it needs to do. You don't need to necessarily have fraud. So you can say, well, the suspicion even of fraud, right? The idea that we can't trust what's going on or any of that's one of the factors. In fact, I'll list the 7. And I won't go into detail. You can go through this, in fact, yourself. There's an article I'll share. I'll make sure that I find it during the show, and I can mention that specific article. And it may actually be the one with Glenn Beck. It was fantastic. And he quotes a lot of this. But number one, semi-autocratic regime, not fully autocratic, provides an opportunity to call the incumbent leader a fascist. Appearance of unpopular president or incumbent leader. That's number two. Number three, united and organized opposition. And in the article, it was talking about Antifa and BLM. Number four, effective system to convince the public well before the election of voter fraud or the idea that you cannot trust what's going on and that it has to be overseen by certain entities. I would bring up the idea of the red mirage, which is what Joe Biden, they'd already cut ads to play after the election, depending on how it played out, of the red mirage, the idea that you can't trust what you're seeing here, that really is, and it's a foregone conclusion, in my opinion, a foregone conclusion that he would win the write-ins, that was just going to be what it was, because you actually have control over that. And then you have number five, compliant media to push voter fraud narrative. Number six, political opposition organization able to mobilize thousands to millions in the street. And number seven, division among military and police. And all seven of those that are, and by the way, these are the seven pillars put together again by Michael McFaul, the former ambassador to Russia under the Obama administration. I believe all seven of those have been met in a way that is satisfactory, right? In a way that is sufficient to provide the conditions necessary to continue what's already begun.
Now, but hasn't Trump been the only one alleging fraud? And he's been doing it for weeks before this. I mean, it seems like Biden hasn't really cast any doubt on the election. Am I wrong about that?
That Biden hasn't? Well, and that's a good question. But the thing is I would look at it and say, well, in a way, yes, they did. They were talking about, they were looking at it differently. And in fact, I was a critic of Trump using the word fraud, and that even in the messaging of that, in the way that he talked about it, that it should simply be a matter of integrity, voting integrity, which is ultimately what the left wanted to ensure everybody was going on. Hey, look, the vote has integrity. And I think the reason why this is a shade different, I think it still has the same end, right? It still has the same goal in mind, is because it's our own country. If it was a foreign country and we don't have the power over the apparatus, right? We don't have power over those levers. Because we don't have that, it would be a different angle of undermining that or of assuring it, right? And so in the United States, for them to sit there and say, Donald Trump is trying to intimidate voters. Donald Trump is trying to disenfranchise voters. He's trying to discourage them. And they would specifically target, in fact, the exact same groups that play in to the, number three, united and organized opposition. So the exact same groups that would fit platform number three are the exact same groups that when they're talking about being disenfranchised from the democratic process, that's the group that the Democrats would constantly bring up, which just simply further mobilizes number three.
Here's a question. Can you address the Great Reset? What does the Great Reset have to do with all this?
The Great Reset here. Let me make sure I got the guy's name right. I'm looking up real quick. Hold on. It's a book. Yeah, there's actually what's the name of the book, man? Ask the guy if he knows it. Otherwise, okay. I believe that it is by. Is he talking the one by Richard Florida? The Great Reset. A new way to live and work, drive post-crash prosperity. This is another.
The post-capitalistic. George Soros, Morgan, all the bankers, the globalists, talking about the Great Reset. Pope Francis is somewhat on board.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I had the right guy's name. So okay, so the thing is that this is actually an old idea. You know, there's some excellent videos online that analyze books of the ruling elite, various books that have been written, and you can see similar themes in this. And there's always this. It's a utopian concept for New World Ordites. Okay, they love this kind of stuff. This idea of something coming in and it's going to create a new normal that's just, you know, lemon drops and lollipops for what they believe. And this is the most recent and maybe most well-crafted one that we can see how it's been playing into things that have literally been shoved down our throat since quarantine, right? Since the advent of COVID. This is not a democratic thing, by the way. We're not voting on masks. We're not voting on quarantine. We're not even voting on the idea of whether or not we should call house arrest quarantine. We're not talking about that. We're just being told you must, and if you don't, you're going to jail or you're going to be fined. Or like Libertas here in Michigan, a private school that my kids, they played them in soccer, that Libertas, man, shut down. They came in, they threatened them, they shut them down. And so this stuff's being forced upon us. And it's got this kind of fatalistic, technocratic crap that it's always this way. Like you can see these videos online where they'll say stuff like, well, you know, there's a guy who's made predictions about certain technologies, and he's talking about, you know, in 2150, it's going to be, you know, we're all going to be talking to each other with our eyes closed 1,000 miles away in our brains and stuff. And we're going to download our brain into, you know, some kind of a computer chip and live forever inside of a robot and that kind of stuff. But this guy, it's post-humanist, it's transhumanist, it is New World Order, gobbledygook, esoteric nonsense. But that's what it is. But the thing is, a lot of people believe that. And right now, the individuals have been psyoped so badly out of their minds that this kind, and they have no mooring anymore with God. They have no mooring with tradition. They have no mooring with reality. Realism is toast. It's all like solipsism to these people. And so this kind of a thing is just a wonderland of wickedness that they would love. So yes, Great Reset. That's a real deal. That's one of those books in the canon, right, of New World Order literature. It's a good question.
So we had all these happenings. We had millions of votes cast on the mail-in ballot, and then we come to November 3rd. So what goes down on yesterday that made you more certain of your color revolution hypothesis?
Everything. Everything. I mean, let me just say it this way. It's actually a little bit frustrating, right? Because you know this, you know what I do. So I broadcast every single day, every weekday from 10 to noon. I have a show. And on that show, we talk a lot about goofy stuff like the great animal uprising of 2020 and stuff like that. And it's a joke of like dogs and cats and spiders and stuff that are coming after us. It's a lot of fun. But the second half of the show is always really serious. And for 2 months now, I have focused, just laser focused on the idea that we are experiencing this. And in fact, it's premised in part on the idea that I have embraced now for years, that we have been experiencing a cold civil war. And because we're experiencing a cold civil war, we cannot look at it in terms of like, oh, it's just ordinary life, because it's not. We're not in that phase anymore. It's nostalgic and naive to believe that. So there are certain rules to war, and this is one of them. But I talked about Shadowgate. I talked about Detroit leaks. I talked about shut down DC. I talked about the Sunrise Movement. These are all Antifa, of course, all the time, talking about Antifa and different Marxist operations across the land, even internationally. Talked about media bias, big tech control, the kind of 1984 stuff that's going on with the way that they're controlling not only the access to what we have, but even manipulating things in such a way that it actually has an impact on the way that we view the world. And we think that we're viewing it ourselves, which again, that's you're now into color revolution stuff. You're into the idea of, well, we're framing this, and we're hedging the narratives. We're determining the Overton window, and we're doing this, and we're censoring and banning people left and right in such a way that it's like frogs in water. And we don't even realize that so much of what we think and so much of what we do is premised on what we have access to. And this has been going on. So I've been warning, and I warned for a week leading up to the election. I said, number one, I said the election will if and when Donald Trump seems and appears to be winning on anything, they're not going to call it, right? Because that would take the air out of the the whole thing. You can't do that. You're going to have an increased amount of doubt regarding the legitimacy on both sides, right? The people, or an increased assurance that everything is good on the side of the people operating the PSYOP, and on the other side, an increased understanding that they can't trust anything, and that's the way that this thing pans itself out, and that there would be a coordinated effort between big tech, big polling, mass media, the Democratic Party, and the boots on the ground, which was amazing to see the timing of the leaks from the Zoom meeting that were going on with the protesters that right now are in Washington, D.C., and they're the primary reason why Donald Trump put an unscalable wall around the White House, because in these Zoom meetings that were leaked, they had not only mapped out various cities across the country, they mapped out where police stations were, where the military was, where the White House had exits in and out. And they were talking about guns. They were talking about taking buildings over. They were talking about possibly dying. And what are they willing to do? And they didn't ask for the war, but they want the war. And I thought it's stunning because they took it to a level that is dramatically cuckoo crazier and more lawless and anarchistic than those loon birds that are in trouble right now for things involving the idea of going after Governor Whitmer, the Boogaloo Boys and others. These people, and right now they're in Washington, D.C., unfazed. They're not arrested. Nothing's going on. You can see interviews with them where they're trying to confront these people. So I wasn't surprised by anything. And I didn't watch any, I didn't even want to watch people talk about, what you're feeling about the polls right now. I didn't care. I'm like, number one, who cares what they say? And everything that I was posting had to do with tomorrow. It had nothing to do with that night. And all my friends, and they're biting their nails to the bone, bleeding out of their fingers, and they're all freaked out. And I'm like, you're not watching my show. I'm mad at you. I'm actually mad at you because
everybody do yourself a favor and go to the link below. Check out Bannister's show, where he will enlighten you about the color revolution. So can you give us a little bit of a play-by-play of the coordination of the timing that you just referred to between big tech, big polling, boots on the ground, all these forces? What can you give us a few examples of what happened that showed you that coordination?
Well, yeah, of course. Number one, we can go back to 2016. In fact, people have to go back to 2016 and begin to, I forget the guy's name. I wish I remembered his name. He's one of the best scholars on the topic of algorithms and the influence of media. So he's been on Tucker a number of times talking about how Google, with various tweaks, for example, how they can change perception by this degree or that degree. And it's studied. They've been able to replicate studies on this to show how this is done. And they've been studying this for years, in fact. So we know, going back to Hillary, the way that search engines would autofill and the things that they wouldn't allow. And then you can, in the lead up to that election, like, for example, Hillary is sick, right? The idea that Hillary is sick, which was evident to anybody really paying attention. I mean, she's coughing up what looks like, egg yolks out of her mouth into glasses of water, and she can't stop coughing. Everybody's handing her Ludens and Ricolas and stuff. I mean, it was really bad. So, like, we all knew that she was hit. But yet they were making it so that you couldn't see it. And you had big tech leaders that were involved that we know, including from WikiLeaks, where they say that they're willing to work with them and do anything they can. But they held back, and Trump won. And the next day they boo-hooed their eyes out, and that video leaked, for example, at Google, everybody doing their thing, crying and freaked out, and assuring and promising, I know a lot of you here are just devastated, and we're going to make sure that we never allow something like this to ever happen again. They made good on that. And we can see it over and over and over with the banning, right? It started, and people want to, I know Alex Jones likes to take credit for like, he's the main one or he's the first one. He wasn't. He was the first one of that magnitude. I mean, at the time they did that, he had the number one or number two news app on Apple, on the iTunes store or the Apple store. And so the App Store. And so he had that. But there were people before that you can see. In fact, Gateway Pundit has a study that they did where they analyzed the way that traffic was dropped after the election. So once the election happened, just dramatic, and it was exclusive to these groups. The throttling that was going on, the shadow banning that was going on, the censoring. And back then, big tech was denying that a lot of those things were even real. It was kind of like Bilderberg. You talk about Bilderberg back in the 90s or early 2000s. You talk about that or Bohemian Grove, you're going to have a whole bunch of people in the media that make fun of you and say that's not real. Now, whenever there's a meeting, they write about it. And it's just a bunch of rich people who get together. But they never said sorry, right? But so you see this over time. You also see in 2016, the letter in WikiLeaks to Podesta, or from Podesta, to a host of individuals from a very diverse listing of people in the media, right? And of organizations to come to his pasta party. He apparently makes really delicious pasta, and he wanted to have all these people over. And you can see in the emails the way that the press works along with politicians and works along with them for access even. And that's as old as time. I mean, even Hunter S. Thompson, there was one thing he wrote about in The Great Shark Hunt that he said that it was a problem for him was that he always tried to tell the truth, even in ways that were creative, but he was always trying to tell the truth. And there was no off the record with him because he didn't care about the access point. He didn't care about that, but he knew that that was extremely damaging to his career and that other people who played that game. So that's old, right? That part. So you have big tech who's committed, right? They're banning Trump people left and right. Not just Alex Jones, but other high profile figures. And then before the election, QAnon. That was a massive, massive purge, and so, and making it so that you can't say certain words. In fact, if you say certain words, algorithms will take you down, and they've gotten really strict about this. And every time you see these places, not every time, I've seen some left-wing places that have been taken down, in fairness. But if you look at the numbers, overwhelmingly, it leans in that direction. And that's because these big tech companies are overwhelmingly leftist. Overwhelmingly. That's why the fact checkers, you go and you say, well, who's doing the fact checking? Oh, it's somebody who used to be with the DNC or worked for Kamala Harris or whatever. Like, it's like, really? That's the person doing the fact check? Wow. Okay. And that's why when you read the news, that's why it really does come off to people as though it's like an apologetic thing, like a debate, and that the media seems to always kind of the way that they frame the argument, the way they frame the stories, the way they frame the characters in the stories, the narratives they talk about, and those they don't are almost always aligned with the interest of the DNC and the Uniparty to some extent, if you include maybe Sunday talk shows and stuff. But that would be, so it goes back, right? It's not new.
Right. Okay. So I know that I did see the big tech censoring. I mean, it's all over Donald Trump's tweets, just talking about the election. And so the big tech censoring is happening. How is this coordinated with the other factors you mentioned that you saw?
Oh, yeah. Do you guys remember? Do you look at we can just do this real quick because I sometimes I blabber on. I'm sorry. That if you take the experience with Ukraine and you take the experience with Russia and you take the experience even going back to the NSA, you can see the connection between media and the military, right? And in fact, you've got projects that took place. What was it, Mockingbird? So you have multiple over the years, even with Hollywood, the involvement with the CIA and the FBI that promise money, in fact, and technology and things like that for for different movies, and that's been outed to show the number of different shows that were involved in that. So even it wouldn't just be the media and or the news and the military industrial complex, but it'll also be the military industrial complex in Hollywood. And then we can see it with COVID, with social media, and even medicine, to say these globalist regimes that say, are organizations like the World Health Organization, for example, where if you can't say something, if you say something that it's like, well, that's against the World Health Organization, you might actually get your channel taken down. They'll put stuff all the time as a reminder. This is what the World Health Organization says. But look at how selective it is. If you have the World Health Organization disagree with something that, what was the one recently with, it was a contact tracing, I forget which one it was, had to do with Whitmer. And they were saying, no, that this is not what we would actually encourage. And if you go and you look and you see there was a leak, in fact, from them, a defector inside that said, hey, look, these are official documents. This is what the World Health Organization actually believes about a whole number of things. Whitmer could deviate from that. I think it may have been masks for sports players, and she can deviate from it, and they're not going to come at her. The media never did. The media wasn't like, hey, look, you're violating the rules of the overlords at the CDC and at the World Health Organization. None of that stuff. And so look at the selective nature, not just at what they do, but what they don't. So you have medicine, and then you have medicine with media, because you had, when we were in lockdown, how many people were watching things on Facebook or watching things on YouTube or watching things on Amazon Prime, and they were just overwhelmed by a flood of propaganda having to do not only with COVID, but BLM. And BLM ended up everywhere. You couldn't even turn on to watch, dudes bounce a ball and dunk it in a hoop. You couldn't do it. You couldn't even turn on the super white NHL. You couldn't do it, right? They tried for a second. They failed. You couldn't go anywhere. It was now in schools. It was, so you can see the apparatus and how the connections work together, and people can say, well, it's just a coincidence. You're like, that's kind of neat, isn't it? Right? Isn't it neat how it's just so coincidental that it all works out this way, and it all kind of coincides. In fact, the timeline begins to overlap, and you can begin to see that these things are not, it's not one thing leading to another, leading to another, leading to another, but it gains enough momentum that at a point, you're now dealing with either seeing commercials about COVID or seeing commercials about social justice, and seeing commercials particularly about Black Lives Matter, the symbolism of Black Lives Matter on almost every web page, almost every corporation making these products. And if they didn't, they were getting, people canceling them like crazy. And so you can see this machine begin to evolve, right? It's like a transformer turning into a monster. And eventually it got to this Megazord level where it is now. And so a long history of smaller things and connections that over time ended up growing bigger and bigger and bigger, to such a point that it's even intuitively recognized by an overwhelming number of Americans who sit there and say, I don't trust them anymore. I don't believe them. I believe they're stooges. I believe that they are Democrats, that it's just Democrat talking points. And that's what it is. But that whole thing has been framed as the resistance to authoritarianism, as a democracy breakthrough. That in and of itself, a breakthrough of democracy, that is at the center of color revolutions.
Yes, making you feel like you're the one doing the revolution. That's the nefarious beauty of it. So what we saw yesterday was the swing vote states were contested, and Trump had certain leads in certain areas. Then they stopped the vote. Trump made a joke in his speech this morning, 2 a.m. or whatever, about, I hope they don't find a bunch of votes. And then they found some votes
at 4 a.m.
A couple hours later, which were all for Biden. And so now there's a few media outlets. I'm not sure. I haven't checked the update on if everyone's called certain states, but they're closing in on the contested states. Biden has significant lead in the Electoral College right now. Where are we at now, Jeremiah? What's going to happen next? What should we do?
Working off of my model. Okay. And number one, let me say this about the Electoral College. People were looking yesterday and you can see the Electoral College numbers lined up and everything based on states that they're like, well, we called these states. And remember, big tech had limited the number of news agencies that were even able to declare and say, to recognize that somebody had won. So to call it. And if you dared to violate that, then you could be throttled, right, in algorithmically to where you're no longer getting a reach. But if you were to add up the states that Trump was winning by margins bigger than Biden was winning in other states, with less areas left to count, with less votes left to count than the areas where Biden was awarded those states. And you say, well, why wasn't Trump awarded those states? If he was awarded those states, would we even be thinking in the terms of Trump is down in the Electoral College? And Fox News played into this, by the way. But okay, getting back to what you asked, though, the idea of what do we do right now? What do we do moving forward? For one, people, if they think that we are just going to, well, you don't got to do much. Just let the process play itself out. That's you're going to lose. You don't know what you're up against, man. These people don't know. They don't have the slightest clue. If they're watching now, they're starting to, if they haven't figured it out already, right? Like the Great Reset guy. He knows. But, the thing is that if we ask ourselves, what is required in a situation that is not normal? What do you do in a situation that, for all intents and purposes, reflects color revolutions, and you are a victim of it? You're part of the victim party of it. And there's a really great piece. It's called "The Steel Is On: What Republicans Must Do Next to Guarantee Victory." And he gives a number of things. Number one, we need to challenge every single ballot, and we need to go to SCOTUS if necessary. I believe that's inevitable. I think that we will inevitably. Supreme Court. Yeah. So that's an inevitable thing with this, but especially in any state that is in state after state with Democratic governments, when talking about this and favorable Trump results, the counting ground to a halt overnight. We need to challenge that. Okay. And especially when, like you said, and it was funny because everybody's mad because he goes, well, we don't want them finding it at 4 a.m. They said they were done counting for the night. They said they were done within 2 hours. At 4:30 in the morning, all of a sudden, well, look at this. We stumbled on a treasure trove of almost exclusively Biden votes. Yay. Look at the other coincidence we're going to try to shove down your throat. And so there's just a lot of coinkydinks that these people think we're going to tolerate. Number two, what type of ballots are allowed to be counted? And he mentions Pennsylvania, where the Supreme Court there ruled the ballots cannot be tossed out for having signatures that don't match state records. And ballots count even if they arrive after election day with no postmark. That has to be challenged, like immediately, stat, because there's no way. I mean, that is literally ripe with potential for fraud. There's no way that you can trust the integrity of that. Number three, you need to hold rallies in contested states. I think that he needs to treat it as if the election's still going, because the fact is, whether we like it or not, it is still going. Joe Biden can pretend all day long. He can LARP all day long and pretend that he is the victor, and we all need to come and rally around. It was a tough battle, and you guys just need to rally around me. No, we do not. This is a big fat lie, and we're on to it. And we need to speak and act as though we do. We can't be playing footsies and tiddlywinks with these people, and we can't sit on the sidelines. But he needs to go. Especially, he needs to go to these contested and corrupt jurisdictions. This is according to the article in Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, even Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. He needs to go to where it's most contested and have his physical presence there every single day, slamming away at that microphone, flooding those streets with people. Number three, GOP legislature in swing states must move to seat Trump electors. I thought this was an interesting thing because when I first read that, I'm like, wait a second, can they do that? And I said, well, there's a lot of these places have Democratic governors. The thing is, though, that makes it bad for making sure that the mechanisms of the government that oversees the integrity of the election, that those things can be manipulated. But if your legislature, and in a lot of these contested states, the legislature is run by the GOP, if that's the case, then there's constitutional precedent. Because if people go back to Bush v. Gore, this is what SCOTUS said: the state legislature's power to select the manner for appointing electors is plenary. If it so chooses, select the electors itself. There's no doubt of the right of the legislature to resume the power at any time, for it can neither be taken away nor abdicated. And the last one, the last two, number 5, persuasion campaign, because this is an info war. I'm not using that in an ironic way. I'm saying in a real way. Okay. This is an info war. What you've experienced is an info war. You've been experiencing it for years now. In fact, it's been mild in the past. It ramped up pretty hardcore to like PSYOP levels in 2016. And right now it is full blown. We're not even in a cold civil war anymore. I don't want to scare anybody, but we're not. We are not in a cold civil war. Okay. This is a time. Imagine for a second if both these candidates don't accept the other claim. Imagine this. And imagine if they don't even accept claim of a court. Where will we find ourselves? We've been there before. It's pretty, not exactly, right? But we've had a time where within the contiguous United States, there were, more than one president. And we know what that's called. Number 6, the last thing, big tech needs to be forced aside. And I've said this before. I use the example of Ruth. I said, conservatives, man, we try to play the game using these technocratic overlords, using their systems. And I think that there's a lesson to be learned from the Little House on the Prairie. And I mean it. I mean this, that there was an episode where I think it was a storm or a tornado came through, wiped out the whole harvest, right? I mean, it's just smashed to the ground, the hail and everything else. And Charles is devastated. All the men in the area are devastated. And then the women get together and they bring up the idea of Ruth. And they said the threshing floor. Why don't we use basically to translate that, why don't we use old tech? And let's salvage as much as we can using technology that we moved away from, but that actually is not inhibited in any way by the storm. And there's a great book. This guy's he's not a Catholic. But he writes over, he's a Mises scholar for the Mises Institute. He writes over at LouRockwell.com. His name is Gary North, and he has a book called Tactics of Christian Resistance. It's written a long time ago, and I'm really grateful that it is, because I think that we need to begin rethinking a lot of the way that we're approaching this. And even President Trump needs to, because if he consigns himself to going through the mediums that are provided by the mainstream, we're done. Welcome to President Biden. That's just what it is, because they've got it closed up. They've got it locked up. Even Fox News. Fox News is a joke. Turn it off. Cut that cable. Keep Tucker, but you can go online and you can watch Tucker. You don't have to have Fox News. Don't give them any money. It's over. And so these are things that need to be done. But Trump and his people, they need to be a physical presence, not just, blasting stuff out. They need to be physically present, and they need to speak directly to the people in a compelling manner. The things that we've talked about tonight, document it, require the people go and look this up to see it, not some pattern like Beautiful Mind, seeing all the tax on the board and stuff. We're talking things that are out there that you can look at and say, this is what in fact, most of that is stuff that they've told you not to look at. And they've made it really hard for you to look at it. And you can say, look at this. This right here really cuts to the core of this topic and of this problem. And so I don't have any projection as to how that will turn out. But I'm hopeful and I'm committed.
Andres Diaz says, what does a Biden presidency mean for Catholicism? Should we prepare for the catacombs?
I don't know how long a Biden presidency would actually last, man. Like, I truly believe when he's out, down in his bunker and stuff and hiding and everything. I think he's genuinely sick. I think people should go and check out JoeBidenIsSick.com. It's got a whole bunch of videos that talk about even his handwriting and his gait, right? His walking gait, things like that. The speech problems, the fact that he needs a handler, a lot like Hillary needed a handler. And so I don't know how long we'd have that, but I think the real concern isn't even him. I think it's Kamala. I think that's who we've actually been running against. And I think that's who Democrats mainly voted for, was Kamala. I don't think that they're voting for Joe Biden. Hardly. I mean, there are some, Edith and Edna at the retirement home and stuff. They're voting for Biden. But, maybe Corn Pop, the guy he got in a fight with, he's like, I remember that. I'm going to vote for you, buddy. But I think people are actually, I think that the left is I don't think they're energized by her. Like they're like, yay, she's the greatest. But I think that I think there's enough of an echo of Obama, and I think Obama is actually behind more than this than we want to know, that we want to think. And so I don't know. I don't think that we'd have to run and hide, no more than we are right now. I mean, we're all staying at home. It's like what was it, man? Back when Susan from Parish Council was even still around, she had that meme that was like, had the priest holding the Eucharist up in the church and everything, and all the pews are empty. And it was like, community doesn't matter. It's the idea of community. We're already there. We're already in this place. We're already castigated. We're already threatened. Our schools are being shut down if we violate these rules. Our churches are being, peeked into with cameras. And so you sit there and you go, dude, this is bad already. We're already, kind of one foot in. So I don't know. But it's a good possibility, especially with the Antifa and BLM and Sunrise Movement, them being so emboldened. I think there's good reason to be afraid of an ever increasing amount of prejudice and discrimination against us, and even persecution.
Do you think Trump has a chance to win in the courts if the media declares for Biden?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the media's we remember, what was it, Humphreys? What was it, man? Wrong before kind of thing. And they were wrong. Think about how wrong they were with their polls, by the way. Just don't even ever believe it anymore. When we see the polls, even with the way that it turned out, the polls were dramatically wrong. But okay, so even if the media does this, and they will, okay, they're going to do this, that the courts, there is going to be a little bit of a quandary, in that they'll say, for the stability of the republic, what are we going to do? On the one hand, it would be like, well, it's a transition because, it's already been kind of declared by the media, but does the media really have authority over that? And this group over here is saying, but it has to be just with valid and licit and authorized ballots and stuff like that, or else it's unjust. And so that's going to be reigning on the scales. That's going to be the balance that they're going to have to deal with. But I think that there's a chance that he will win. And if he doesn't win, like, for example, he's not going to win in Pennsylvania. I don't believe he will. I don't believe he'll win in Pennsylvania. I believe he could win in Michigan. And if he doesn't in either one, he can go to the Supreme Court. But this is where it gets dangerous, because if ACB doesn't recuse herself, then the kind of stuff that we saw in 2016, with people going crazy, screaming no at the sun and everything, and hitting people and breaking faces and stuff like that, and the stuff we've seen over the summer with individuals, Trump supporters, getting straight up executed in the streets, that kind of a thing, that's going to look like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And so, because the idea that she's going to say that Trump is in the wrong, she's going to stand for the idea of originalism. She's going to stand for the idea that I don't know if they even have the right to say that we can keep on going afterward. How does that play out? And can you change it at the last minute? Well, we're going to go till this day, and we're going to keep counting till Thursday or Friday. I mean, they're just pulling it out of their rear end at this point. So I can't imagine, number one, I can't imagine she'd recuse herself. Number two, I can't imagine that she would side with the loosey-goosey anarchistic model that the Dems are relying on right now. And I can't imagine that the Dems would react in any other way than mass violence if any of those other two things happened.
Well, as we wrap up, Jeremiah, thank you so much for your analysis of the color revolution. And what are your final thoughts on this situation? I'm sure we'll talk again soon about everything that's happening, because it will most likely be going on for some time.
Yeah.
But any final thoughts at this point on November 4th?
Yeah. Well, I want to say a couple of things first. I hope people go to that Revolver article with the idea of a color revolution and what Trump should do. I hope people go to sunriseexposed.com to understand what's going on and the plans that they have, not just for the night of the election. In fact, that wasn't even a real big night for them. It was the next day and the day after that and the day after that. And you need to see these videos to understand what exactly we're up against, even just with that specific dynamic of the color revolution. I hope you also go, of course, JoeBidenIsSick.com, as well as StopTheSteal.com. Both of those two have to do with Ali Alexander. And it was cool to see, man, on election night, he was actually at a party with Taylor Marshall. It's kind of cool. I was like, really, man? What's up with that, dog? So it's kind of a cool deal with that. But I would encourage you to go check it out. But more than all of that, okay, and to check out my show, because I talk about this stuff deeply, and we have a lot of comments. We engage for 2 hours. We do the whole thing. It's tons of fun. It's every day, 10 to noon. But more than all of that, and what I say on the show is what I'll say here. No matter what, God is a God of power. God is a God of providence. God is a God of miracles. And God is a God that allows things to happen sometimes to nations and civilizations that are experiences of discipline. There's been a big price tag for the sins that we've committed as a nation. And we've committed some of the most grotesque sins in the history of the world. It's easy to say how great we are, and I believe that we're truly great. On the other hand, we are almost like a yin-yang kind of thing. We got Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde with this, and we need to repent. We need to drop on our knees, to take a knee for Jesus. And we need to resolve that no matter what, whether Trump remains, whether Trump goes and we get Biden, and whether Biden stays and Kamala's here, it doesn't matter. The truth is to resolve every single day, to give everything you got, to never give up, to keep on smiling with your hope in Christ, and to remember that you're going to die. And you don't know when that is. And you need to do your best to redeem the time using your gifts and talents. That's our motto at my show. And that's what I believe is best in this moment, in fact, for how we ought to behave as Christians, as Catholics, and just as Americans as a whole. I think we need to do that. And so that's what I would say. So no matter where it goes, but in the meantime, catch up with me. We got a lot of fighting to do. It ain't stopped.
Absolutely. And just so people know, if I go to your website, paleocratdiaries.com.
Yeah, man.
So here's the site. And so if I scroll down here, it has all posts. If I just want to subscribe to your next video, where do I go here?
Dude, go right there.
View all.
Well, go up. You can go up. Let's see here. Go to, let me see. It might be at the bottom. I've never subscribed to my own site. I've never gone through this. I should. This is fancy. You're all fancy pants on me right now.
Well, so this has got your stuff from, if I just go to all posts.
Okay, so why don't you just go to the spooktacular one? Go back up. That's funny right there, man. There's a expose the COVID thing. It's a hilarious political satire because it's funny. You got to click on the actual article itself, or else you're just gonna watch the video right there. See if you scroll down a little bit.
Would you recommend people subscribing to you on YouTube?
No, yes and no. I would say do it right here. If you go on, click on tonight, right there. Tonight, our Halloween special.
Yeah.
Yep. Click on that. There you go. And then down at the bottom. Yep. Scroll down to the bottom of that. Yeah, that's my spooktacular. Yep.
Okay.
Well, no, scroll down. Keep scrolling. Right there.
Subscribe right here.
Subscribe. If you subscribe, and look at the colors, man, it's playful and fun. It's playful. And so the thing is, we have a really good time. And if you subscribe, we don't spam people. We don't send a bunch of stuff. You know what I mean? In fact, a newsletter. I got to get MailChimp, because as it stands right now, the only updates you'll get are if I update the site at all with the video from the day. And what I do is I try to make it so that we have timestamps and topics. So we have a table of content, and it's got the topics. And sometimes I'll put, if it's a really cool article or a series of them, I will hyperlink those to the topic. And the timestamp, you can just click on that bad boy and it will take you directly to that topic. So you don't have to fumble around for 2 hours. I mean, that's, I'm cranking out, 10 hours of, well, and it's actually most of the times like 2.5. So, I mean, it's like, 12 and a half hours a week of original content, not including exclusive videos that are unlisted, that the only way to watch those, like the Spooktacular one, that was really, all it is funny. It's only funny stories. That's it. And it's really a good time. And I think I wore a sombrero. It was a lot of fun. And so, you can watch that, but you have to watch it at the .com. So if you subscribe, you'll get those, but we're not going to send anything else. We don't share any of your stuff. Yeah,
if you just go to paleograddiaries.com, scroll all the way to the bottom, and you can subscribe to our newsletter. Put your email in, get all your posts. Awesome. Yeah. Well, right. On your final note, I just want to get that out before we closed. But I think what you said at the end before we talked about your website is fantastic. That's exactly what we need to think about. We are going to die, and the end of the world will happen when we die. So let's think about the fact that we're going to die. We're going to go to judgment. We're going to have 4 more years of somebody. And then after that, what next? So let's offer up an Our Father for that intention, everything you just said so well. Jeremiah, I always appreciate and enjoy our conversations.
I love you.
Sure, we'll talk again very soon. So let's offer up an Our Father.
Yep.
Father, Son, the Holy Ghost. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost.